Welcome learners to this session on control techniques. The learning objectives of this session are as follows. At the end of this session, you will be able to explain the need of control techniques. We will also classify various methods under the traditional and modern techniques. We will also look into various other methods that are available to the manager in order to exercise control. And we will also discuss about the other contemporary control techniques. And finally, towards the end, we will describe the various implications of control. Dear students, as discussed in the earlier session, that control is one of the very important function of management, and it is said it is primarily a goal-oriented function in an organization. It is basically concerned with the measurement and evaluation of performance so as to secure the best results of managerial efforts. So as discussed earlier in the previous session, whatever plans are put into place, whether these plans are being achieved in the right direction or not, control system helps in that particular task. We also know by now that a control system is needed for three purposes. What are these three purposes? First, it is required to assess and measure the progress of any task. Second, we know by now that a control system can also help any management to uncover deviations, if any, during the implementation process. And finally, a control system should be robust enough to indicate if any corrective action is to be taken in a time-bound manner. There are various types of control techniques which are at the disposal of any manager. Though we will not be going into detail of each of these methods, but a broad overview will help you to understand that the plethora of techniques that are available to a manager can give enough confidence to any person that control is essential and important task. There are various ways under which the control techniques are typically classified. And one of the popular way of classifying the methods are basically the traditional techniques, and second, we call them as the modern techniques. However, the following points are worth considering. You should remember these important points which will help you to select and pick up a technique which is in the interest of the organization. Remember that control is a mechanism to monitor progress rather than a pressure tactic. So as a leader, you should always remember that control should not be used or rather misused as a pressure tactic. Rather, it is a mechanism which can help you to monitor progress and improve the performance of the organization. A good control should always be timely. Any late assessment of performance will really not help the organization and the individuals. The cost effectiveness of control should also be looked into very carefully, and controls should be as far as possible accurate and objective. Accuracy and objectiveness is very important. Control should be acceptable to all. So which means that whatever control mechanisms you are trying to put into place, they should be made aware to all the possible employees whom you are trying to control, or any process that you are trying to control. So that winning of acceptability is one of the prerequisite of a good technique. And remember, instead of applying control from above, the emphasis should always be control from within. However, in the organizational context, the formal control mechanisms and systems should be put into place. There are various traditional methods that have been used in the past by various organizations. Now let us list them out, that what are these various traditional techniques. Number one technique, which is typically used by small businesses, is what we call as the technique of personal observation. So here the emphasis is not in terms of collecting too much of data and then trying to process it. Rather, it is the experience of the manager or the senior or the superior that through personal observation itself they are able to assess the performance of an individual. We all know this is not a very scientific way. Therefore, the next method which was developed is the usage of statistical reports. So in this case, the organization ensures that as much data as possible that can be generated is made available to the person who is responsible for control, and the person now tries to process that data into more meaningful information by using appropriate statistical methods. It has been found that statistical reports come quite handy, especially for small size businesses or mid-scale businesses, those who cannot invest too much onto buying the robust methods that are being developed regarding control. The third popular method is the method of break-even analysis. Now, a break-even analysis, the basic idea is to ensure that what amount of sales should be done so that you are able to recover your fixed cost. So, we all know that money becomes a very important aspect of any business. So, break-even analysis comes quite handy, and it is one of the very popular traditional techniques that has been used. And finally, it's the budgetary control techniques. Now within this, there are various subheads which can be made possible. What are these heads? The idea here is that if you control the finances, if you control the money or the budget part, automatically various things are taken in the interest of the organization. So the first method is the sales budget method. So here what you try to do is you are trying to establish certain standards, certain benchmarks, that what amount of sale is to be achieved. So you create budget for that. Second is the production budget. So in case if you are into the manufacturing setup, or even if you are into services, what amount of production is desirable in order to ensure that you do not run into losses and you are able to maintain adequate profitability in the long run. Linked to it is the material budget. Then the cash budget comes into play, where you need to know that what is the minimum working capital that you have to keep in order to ensure that your business does not come onto a standstill. And finally, if in the long run the organization intends to grow into a bigger enterprise, capital budget is another method that is used by many organizations to ensure that right kind of infrastructure is put into place in order to ensure that the working of the organization is in the interest. And finally, we all know that today is the world where if you do not innovate, there is a high possibility that you can become extinct. So therefore, any good organization will always have its own research and development budget. So under budgetary control, these are some of the indicative heads under which the appropriate control mechanism should be put into place. Then comes the various modern techniques or modern methods that have been developed and used by various organizations. In this case, the first point pertains to the idea of return on investment, which means whatever money has been invested by the entrepreneur or by the organization, how much return are you expecting from that particular product line or that entire business needs to be evaluated. This is again very important because We all know that only a profitable enterprise can sustain in the long run. So therefore, what is the expectation of the leader, of the top management in terms of the assessment should be assessed, and appropriate comparisons should be made in a time-bound manner on a continuous basis. The second very popular analysis, what we call as the ratio analysis. Ratio analysis, though comes from the finance part, but are really helpful for any organization to assess its performance on a continuous basis. There are various ratios which can be looked into, which include the liquidity ratio, the solvency ratio, the profitability ratio, and the turnover ratio. So all these ratios can come quite handy for any executive or any manager to assess the financial health of the organization. The third modern technique comes from the domain of operations management, and we call them as network techniques. There are two broad techniques which are available for any decision maker, and there are various softwares which can help and guide any person to design a particular project. So what are these methods? CPM here stands for the critical path method, and PERT here stands for program evaluation and review techniques. Both these techniques are used by project managers where various tasks or activities are identified, their sequencing is done, the amount of resources that are required for any activity to be completed, what is the minimum duration for the activity is required, and in the process the overall project duration gets evaluated. And using both these network techniques, a continuous control mechanism can be put into place where the performance is assessed on a continuous basis, simultaneously basis, in order to ensure that the cost gets reduced. After the network techniques, today we all know that every organization has started believing in the management audit. Now this audit can be internal as well as can be external. All good leading organizations will always have an internal audit department within the organization. What is the job of this department? The job of this department is to ensure and assess whether all other departments are actually working as per the expectations of the top management. And in case if there is any deviation, the same deviation gets reported to the concerned person or the head of the department, and necessary corrective actions are taken into consideration. Apart from the internal audit, many organizations, in fact there are regulatory requirements also now that an external audit is to be done in terms of the governance of the organization, in terms of the management of funds of the organization. So both the internal audit and the external audit together helps any organization to ensure that their performance is enhanced in the long run. Any good organization will always have a robust management information system. Today, with the use of technology, it's very easy to capture information, store information, and is also made available to the concerned decision makers so that they are in a position to take appropriate corrective action. An organization which does not invest in management information system will always find challenges in terms of the communication, the flow of information, and the misutilization of resources, which is not in the interest of the organization. There are various other methods that are also available for any organization to ensure that a control technique is put into place. As I have just discussed, the concept of internal audit is gaining momentum, and it's very important to understand that the people working in the internal audit should operate in an unbiased manner. They are responsible to ensure that the health of the organization is in track. Internal audit is always a preventive mechanism, whereas external audit can result in more corrective actions. So internal audit is done before the external audit is taken place. The second popular method is what we call as the responsibility accounting system. This is again gaining momentum in many organizations where the responsibilities are properly defined. Of course, with responsibility comes authority, but this responsibility phenomena ensures that every person or every employee of the organization is clear that what specific tasks are they supposed to do. The next is the external audit control, and both the internal audit and the external audit ultimately gets linked to each other. And external audit at times becomes the regulatory requirement, as I just discussed, and this should also be put into place. And finally, another popular method that is now gaining acceptance worldwide is what we call as the zero-based budgeting. So rather than going back to what you did in the previous year or previous years, a zero-based budgeting method helps you to start from scratch. So your standards which you are setting up for future years should always be evaluated by assuming that everything is the slate is now clean and you're starting from zero. So this always helps you to create benchmarks which are much more realistic, much more achievable, and are in consonance with the changing conditions in the environment. Similarly, another popular methods include the activity-based costing. Here, what is done is that each activity that is taking place within the organization is added to certain cost. There are inventory control methods, which includes the ABC analysis, the economic order quantity method, just-in-time method, which basically came from Japanese organization, fixation of stock levels so that you do not invest too much money onto the inventory within the organization. There are quality control methods which include inspection, statistical quality control. The concept of total quality management helps the organization to ensure that they believe in ultimate quality and they don't want to compromise on the services that are delivered to the consumers. The methods like Six Sigma, quality circles, benchmarking, economic value added, and the ISO standards, which have become so popular across various industries, help any organization to ensure that appropriate quality control methods are put into place. And finally, the overall control system gets reflected by two important documents. One is the profit and loss statement and second is the balance sheet. So both these documents ultimately reflect the financial health of any organization. Remember, any process that is put into place should always help the organization to improve the sales in the long run, thereby increasing the profitability in the long run. Because we know that only profitable organizations can sustain in the long run. Now at the end, let us look at the various implications of control. Remember, too many controls by the management may create adverse reaction among the employees. As I discussed earlier, control is put into place to improve the performance. It should not be used as a tool to punish anyone. Of course, there are factors in case if there are errors committed, there is deviation, appropriate punishment should be given, but it should not be used as a tool for that. The narrow approach of management in performance appraisal may discourage good potential workers for taking that extra initiative, right? So if you put up too many control systems and your performance appraisal system becomes, very difficult for anyone to achieve. So there is always this risk that good and potential workers may not take that extra initiative. So therefore, that control system has to be devised in such a way that it also encourages creativity among the employee. It also motivates them to take the extra initiative wherever it is required. The short-term approach taken by management in running the organization affects the long-term interest of any organization. So don't forget that whatever you do in short term, the actions that you take in short term ultimately affects the long-term interest of any organization. Too much pressure on the employees for achieving the predetermined standards sometimes leads to falsification of reporting or information. So one has to be very, very careful that whatever information is coming to you is really very authentic. So here, technology plays a very, very important role. In this case, if the management information system is robust, so there is very less chances that the falsification of reporting is done. Another important point is, do not put the standards should be realistic. As we said, they should be achievable. If you do not provide adequate resources and authority, but only put responsibility of the individual, such falsification the probability becomes very high. So this may discourage good workers to undermine the very purpose of control. And remember, over centralization in decision making also creates an alien attitude among workers. So what level of decentralization is required in order to ensure the workers feel good should be taken into consideration. The management should try to avoid negative control such as punishment, issuing memos, etc. So dear students, in this session we have learned about the various control methods that are available. We also understood what is the need of control techniques. We discussed various contemporary control methods that are now available to any decision maker in order to ensure that the control system is robust and effective. And finally, towards the end, we discussed the implications of control and the various suggestions that are desirable in order to ensure that the control becomes very, very effective. Thank you.